When my apartment complex flooded due to a burst pipe, I didn't have a lot of options. Most of my friends were out of town for the summer, and the university housing office told me I'd be on a wait list for at least 3 weeks. I was packing up what I could salvage when I got the text from Aunt Lena. "You can stay here if you need to. Guest room's clean. No pressure." We hadn't spoken in a while. Nothing bad, just time and life doing what it does. But she was my mom's younger sister, and growing up, she used to babysit me every summer when my parents worked. Some of my calmest memories came from her place. The quiet backyard, the breeze through linen curtains, the scent of jasmine from her perfume, and something always baking in the oven. So I said yes. When I pulled into her driveway the next morning, my car still smelling faintly like damp carpet, she opened the front door before I could knock. Barefoot, holding a mug of coffee, one hand on her hip like always. She looked exactly the same, or maybe a little softer in the eyes. "Still drink it black?" she asked, holding out the mug. "Only way," I said, trying not to smile too much. Her house hadn't changed. Same pale colors, same scattered books on every surface, same warm hush that made it feel like the world outside didn't matter once the door closed. She led me to the guest room, fresh sheets, fresh towels, everything already in place like she'd known I'd say yes. "It's just temporary," I told her. Maybe more for myself than for her. She didn't answer, just smiled and said, "We'll see." We settled into a quiet rhythm over the next few days. I helped her fix the sliding screen door. She asked me to set up her new router. She made dinner every night, simple stuff, but always with some small flair. Lemon zest in the pasta, basil from the porch. We ate by the open window while cicadas buzzed outside, and we talked like we hadn't missed any time. She worked from home, some remote project management thing I didn't fully understand, and spent most of her mornings on video calls. I tried to stay out of the way, read books, did laundry, napped, but the house was small, and even when I wasn't looking for her, I found her. She moved differently now, slower, maybe more intentional. She wore long cardigans over tank tops, soft shorts that hung loose on her hips, sometimes barefoot, sometimes in those fuzzy socks with worn patches on the heel. Hair tied up in a messy bun, reading glasses always nearby. There were moments, tiny ones, that kept replaying in my head, like the time she bent over to load the dishwasher and I caught myself watching the curve of her back, then immediately looked away, embarrassed even though no one saw. Or when she handed me a dish towel and our fingers touched, just barely, but long enough for my brain to catch the static. And then there was the night she sat beside me on the couch, her legs tucked under her, scrolling through old photos on her tablet. "You remember this?" she asked, tilting it toward me. I did. Me and her on the porch, eating ice cream, my face covered in chocolate. She looked the same, except younger, hair longer, eyes brighter. But the smile? That was still hers. "You used to call me your summer mom," she said softly. "I was a weird kid," I replied. "You were a sweet kid," she corrected, nudging my arm with hers. We sat in silence for a moment, the glow of the tablet casting soft light on her face. Her perfume was subtle, like citrus and something floral. I noticed it more than I should have. "Time's strange," she said suddenly. "You blink and someone's taller than you, drinking coffee, fixing your Wi-Fi." I laughed lightly, unsure of what to say. She turned her face toward mine, closer than I realized. Her eyes scanned me, not in a casual way, but not obviously inappropriate either. Just deliberate. Then she looked away. "Sorry, that came out weird." "It didn't," I said too quickly. She smiled but didn't answer. That night, I lay in bed in the guest room, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in slow, hypnotic circles. The sheets smelled like her fabric softener. The house was still. I could hear the faint creak of floorboards from the hallway, and for a moment, I thought she might stop by my door. She didn't, but the thought stayed with me longer than it should have. The next morning, we had breakfast in the kitchen. Eggs, toast, leftover muffins she swore were still good. She wore a long robe over a camisole, hair loose from sleep, one sock missing. "You okay?" she asked, pouring coffee. "Didn't sleep much," I said. She glanced at me but didn't press. The air between us wasn't weird exactly, but it was different, like something had been acknowledged without being said. Like we'd both stepped 1 inch closer to a line we didn't know we were drawing, and neither of us was ready to erase it. Plus, the days began to blend into each other in that soft, hazy way that only quiet houses and summer heat can create. Mornings were slow. Coffee, emails for her, random errands for me. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we didn't. But even silence had weight now. The kind that didn't feel empty. That Thursday afternoon, she asked if I could help clean out the storage closet. "I've been meaning to do it forever," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Too many boxes from a past life." I followed her down the hall. She knelt beside the closet and opened it with a grunt. "This is going to be embarrassing." It wasn't. Not really. Old photo albums, tangled extension cords, candles with no scent left, a few sweaters still in dry cleaner plastic. She sat on the floor cross-legged in yoga pants and an oversized t-shirt with a faded band logo, tossing things into keep and toss piles. At one point, she held up an old hoodie. "This used to be yours," she said. I took it. "No way." "Way," she replied. "You wore it for 3 summers straight." I smiled, pressing the worn fabric to my face. It still smelled like some mix of her house and my childhood. Familiar and not. She kept sorting. I kept watching her in the periphery. How strands of hair kept falling from her messy bun. How her shirt slipped slightly off one shoulder as she reached overhead. I looked away every time I caught myself staring. But each time it got harder. Later that night, after dinner and a glass of wine each, she walked past my room in slippers, holding a book. I was lying on the bed in gym shorts and a loose t-shirt, flipping through my phone. The hallway light poured in behind her. "You decent?" she asked from the doorway, tone teasing. "Barely," I said, then regretted it immediately. But she only laughed. "Mind if I sit for a bit? I can't read in my room. It's too stuffy." I nodded, sitting up slightly and moving toward the wall. She stepped in, barefoot now, and curled up on the other side of the bed, back against the headboard, legs drawn up beneath the long hem of her shirt. Her presence filled the room in a way that made it feel both too small and just right. She opened the book, flipped to a page, then paused. "I used to read in bed like this all the time," she said. "When you were little, you'd crawl in next to me with a flashlight and pretend you were reading too." I smiled at the memory. "I just wanted to be where you were." She glanced at me. "I remember." We sat like that for a while. She read. I scrolled. Occasionally, we'd both comment on some noise from outside, or one of us would stretch, and the blanket between us would shift. But mostly, we just sat, together. At one point, she shifted positions, and her bare knee brushed mine. She didn't move away. Neither did I. My throat tightened. I didn't know if it was the heat, or the wine, or the way the room suddenly felt like a different planet. But the silence was no longer safe. It buzzed, hummed. "I missed this," she said quietly, not looking up from her book. "Missed what?" "Having someone in the house. Someone who makes the space feel lighter." I swallowed. "I like being here." She looked at me then. Really looked. "I know." And then she closed the book. The air thickened. We were too close now. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel her warmth through the blanket. Her eyes drifted down, then back up. "You've grown up," she said, almost to herself. "I think you said that already." "I didn't mean height." I didn't respond. Couldn't. She leaned her head back against the wall, exhaled slowly, then turned toward me. "You ever wonder," she asked softly, "what it would be like if we met now? Not as aunt and nephew, just strangers." I blinked. "Why?" She shrugged one shoulder, her shirt slipping slightly again. "Because you're not a kid anymore, and I'm not who I was when you were." I couldn't look away from her. "I think about it sometimes," she added, voice low. "What we'd say, what you'd notice first." I felt my pulse throb in my neck. "Would you talk to me?" she asked. "If we met somewhere?" "Definitely." She smiled faintly, not moving. "Would you flirt?" I hesitated. "Yeah," I said. "Probably." She nodded slowly. "Then maybe I'd flirt back." The space between us became unbearable. She wasn't teasing. Her tone wasn't playful. She was calm, steady, like she had accepted something hours ago and was only now letting me catch up. She reached over, slowly, deliberately, and adjusted the edge of the blanket covering my leg, fingers brushing against my skin. Just once. The contact was small, but it felt seismic. And then she said it. Her voice was soft, but clear. The kind of voice that meant every word, even if it trembled underneath. "We shouldn't, but do you want to?" I didn't answer, not because I didn't know, but because I knew exactly what I wanted. And it terrified me. For a long time, I didn't move. Her words hung in the space between us like steam in a closed room. Thick, slow, undeniable. "We shouldn't, but do you want to?" It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a test. It was the most honest sentence I'd heard in months. I turned my head slowly, heart pounding, breath shallow. She wasn't looking at me. Her gaze was fixed somewhere across the room, her jaw still, her fingers gripping the blanket like she'd just said something she couldn't take back. I studied her profile in the soft light from the hallway. Her hair slightly mussed from lying back, a faint flush rising in her neck, her lips parted just barely. And I realized something in that moment. She was afraid too. Not of me, but of herself. Of what this meant. Of what it could become. Of what it already was. I sat up straighter, resting my elbows on my knees, trying to breathe through the swirl in my chest. I wanted to say 100 things, none of which felt right. I wanted to ask her if she was sure, if this was real, if she'd still mean it tomorrow morning. But instead, I said the only thing that came out. "Yeah." Her head turned slightly, but she didn't meet my eyes. "I didn't think you'd say it out loud," I added quietly. "I didn't plan to. And now," she finally looked at me, "now I'm trying to figure out if I meant it." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was loaded, charged, like we were standing at the edge of something neither of us had mapped. I shifted toward her. Not dramatically, just enough to let my arm brush hers. "I don't want to make this harder," I said. "But I don't want to lie either." Her eyes stayed on mine. "You've always been honest," she whispered, "even when you were too young to know what that meant." "I'm not too young now. I know." We sat like that, breath to breath, pulse to pulse. And then she reached up, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and let her hand fall gently onto my thigh. Not possessively, not even with pressure, just a point of contact. Her voice came even softer than before. "I'm not asking for forever. I know. I'm not even asking for tomorrow." I nodded slowly. "Just now. Just now," she echoed. My heart was a war drum. My thoughts were a blur. But her hand was warm, steady. Her touch was real. I don't want to regret this, she said suddenly, voice thick. Not because of what we do, but because of what it means. I swallowed hard. Then don't let it mean anything you don't want it to. That made her laugh. Quiet, breathless, like it surprised her. God, when did you get so calm? I'm not calm, I admitted. I'm losing my mind. Her eyes softened. You're hiding it well. We stayed close like that for what felt like hours but was probably minutes. Nothing happened. Nothing needed to. The decision was already made. We'd crossed a line that wouldn't uncross. Then she leaned in, not a kiss, not even a full motion. Just enough that her forehead barely touched my temple. I don't know how to feel about this, she murmured. You don't have to figure it out tonight. Another beat. Then she pulled away just enough to look me in the eyes again. I didn't plan this. I believe you. And yet, she didn't finish. She didn't have to, because in the quiet, in the closeness, in the way she leaned into my shoulder, I knew exactly what she meant. Her hand was still on my leg. My fingers hovered just beside hers. We didn't link them, not yet, but the gravity was there. The choice. Can I stay here? She asked suddenly, barely above a whisper. My throat tightened. You mean tonight? She nodded once. I looked at her, messy hair, quiet eyes, the trace of fear behind her calm. And I knew that if I said yes, it wasn't about sex. It wasn't about impulse. It was about something else. Something quieter. Something far more dangerous. Still I said, yeah, of course. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath the whole time. I just don't want to be alone right now, she said. Not after saying what I said. You're not. She eased down onto the bed slowly, lying back on the pillow beside me. We stayed like that, both staring at the ceiling, the fan turning in lazy circles, the room lit only by the hall glow slipping under the door. Our arms brushed, then our hands. Eventually, her fingers found mine, and stayed. The sun came early. It spilled through the slats of the blinds in soft stripes, warming the sheets before I even opened my eyes. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I let the weight of the moment sink into my skin, let the stillness wrap around me like the edge of a dream I didn't want to leave. She was still there, beside me, facing away, one hand tucked under her cheek, the other resting gently on her stomach. Her breathing was steady, calm, like nothing in the world had shifted, like we were just two people sharing a bed because there wasn't space anywhere else. But we both knew better. We hadn't kissed. We hadn't touched beyond that one shared breath and the quiet clasp of fingers. But that night, with her beside me in the dark, was more intimate than anything I'd ever known. I sat up slowly, careful not to stir her. My shirt was wrinkled, the sheets tangled around my legs. I rubbed the back of my neck, unsure whether the pounding in my chest was nerves, guilt, or something worse, something like wanting more. She shifted slightly, a soft breath catching as she turned onto her back. Her eyes opened, not startled, not groggy, just open. Hey, she said, voice rough with sleep. Hey, a pause. Then, what time is it? Early. She blinked up at the ceiling for a moment before sitting up, pulling the blanket higher over her lap. For a while, we didn't speak. Not because there was nothing to say, but because anything said too soon might shatter whatever fragile stillness we'd built the night before. Finally, she spoke. Do you regret it? No, I said immediately. She looked at me, eyes searching, not judging. You sure? I'm sure. She nodded slowly, pulling her legs up to her chest beneath the covers. I didn't think I'd sleep. You did. You made it feel safe. That hit me harder than I expected. Good, I said quietly. We sat like that for a bit, back against the headboard, shoulder to shoulder but not touching. The air between us was still thick with unspoken things, but it didn't feel dangerous now. Just delicate. She turned to me. So what now? I don't know, I admitted. Do we pretend nothing happened? I hesitated. Did anything happen? She smiled softly. Everything happened. I nodded. Then no, I don't want to pretend. Her smile faded into something more thoughtful. It's complicated. Yeah. You're staying here a few more weeks. I can find somewhere else? I said quickly, though my chest tightened at the thought. No, she said, shaking her head. That's not what I meant. What did you mean? She looked at me like she wasn't sure she should say it. Then, finally, I meant, I'm not sorry. That silence came again. But this time it felt different. Grounded. Me neither, I said. A few hours later, we moved back into the kitchen, our familiar territory. She wore a long t-shirt and her usual house cardigan. I wore the same clothes as the night before. We didn't mention it. The coffee brewed slowly. The kettle whistled softly. She poured mine without asking, slid it across the counter with a faint smile. Still black, she said. Always. We moved around each other easily like we always had, but something about it was sharper now. Every step felt measured. Every glance longer than before. She stood by the sink, sipping from her mug, watching the backyard through the window. I used to think nothing ever changed in this house, she said absently. And now, she looked at me. Now I realize it's not the house that changed. It's us. She nodded. That afternoon, I helped her fix the curtain rod in the guest room. We didn't talk much, but there was no awkwardness. Just moments of eye contact. A shared glance that lingered longer than needed. That night, I returned to my room after brushing my teeth. She was in the hallway on her way to bed. We paused in passing, close, but not close enough to touch. Sleep well, she said, barely above a whisper. You too. She hesitated. Then gently, if you need anything, you know where my room is. I nodded. Same. She gave a quiet smile and turned, the hem of her robe trailing just above the floorboards. I watched her disappear into the soft amber glow of her room. And for the rest of the night, I lay awake. Not restless, not confused, but aware. Aware that something had changed forever. Not loudly, not all at once, but completely and quietly.